into where other items were stored.
Ben Kochman, Post.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Your office was the office that had been prosecuting Jeffrey before he died in custody. I have not read your detention memo yet. It's the first thing I'm going to do after this ends. But does the memo address, or is your office concerned with Combs' safety in custody, given what happened with Epstein?
So we are concerned with anyone's safety whenever they are detained prior to trial. It's part of our obligations to keep people safe as well. It's part of the criminal justice system. So, but I do not draw any sort of connection between Jeffrey Epstein's suicide and what may or may not happen to any other defendant while they are detained pretrial. And of course, the decision whether to detain the defendant up to a judge. Our position is that pretrial detention is warranted under the law and based on the facts of this case, and I'll leave it at that.
Are some of the prosecutors on this case some of the same prosecutors that had been handling that, or that worked on the Maxwell case?
So I'm not going to get into the staffing. I will say that this team, this group of AUSAs, this incredible group has been working on this case around the clock, and they've had their hands full. Next question.
Gus Rosendale, NBC News.
Good morning, sir. Combs' attorney said that his client has been cooperative with investigators. He said that this morning. I was wondering if you would have a reaction to that.
Let me just say this. I think that generally and with increasing frequency, the word cooperative or cooperating has taken on tremendous elasticity, and it no longer really bears any relation to what the word means when we use it in a very specific context. So responding to lawful process and the like does not qualify as cooperation when we use that term here.
Mike Sisak, AP.
Thanks. To that end, was there any discussion of Mr. Combs' surrender? I understand he was taken into custody at a hotel in Manhattan last night, and maybe that wasn't the plan. Can you elaborate on how that came about and why that was?
I'm not going to be able to get into any sort of operational details as to how he was taken into custody and when. He is in custody right now. He will be appearing in court later today.
Was there any discussion of him surrendering, given they claim he's cooperating?
I'm not going to be able to get into law enforcement tactics or operations.
Maybe he makes a big deal of the guns, but how come they're not charged outright or with obliterating serial numbers?
Well, I can't get into the charging decision. It is very meaningful to us that weapons were possessed, as we allege in the indictment. Part of the reason why this conduct was so pervasive and harmful is because victims and others didn't necessarily feel comfortable denying him his wishes, as we allege, because of the presence of arms. I should leave it there.
Thanks. Last question, Jacob Shamison.
Jacob Shamsian, Business Insider. Thank you. Given that he's the sole defendant in this case and that you allege he's part of a conspiracy that involves members of his companies, do you anticipate a superseding indictment that bring allegations against other members of his companies or other co-conspirators as well?
I can't take anything off the table. Anything is possible. Our investigation is very active and ongoing. And I think a lot of you who cover this office know that when we say such things, that developments are certainly foreseeable, but I predict them sitting here today. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
What part of his business empire is exposed for Richard?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so there you have it. That was Damian Williams, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, talking a little bit more about the indictment facing Sean Combs, as well as this bail package letter that was sent to the judge, and Combs is going to be making an appearance in court later today. There are no cameras allowed in New York courts or federal courts. But I want to get some perspective on some things that he talked about. I'm back here with Bradford Cohen and Chris Hansen. Chris, I'll start with you. Number of things reiterated a lot what was said already in the indictment, but touched upon a few other things in terms of whether or not anybody else would be charged, whether or not there'd be other charges facing Sean Combs, and he said nothing's off the table. What did you take away from that?
Well, I think this investigation is ongoing. You know, this is the same office that did Jeffrey Epstein. Same
He was
office,
asked about that too.
Same office that did Peter Nygaard, you know, one of the biggest predators allegedly ever. So they have a lot of experience here, and I'm sure with the sheer volume of evidence, the things just referred to in the detention letter, the things that are referred to in the indictment, I mean, they're probably still going through some of this stuff. I'm sure they have obviously what they need to go to trial at this point, but these things develop all the way up into the very day that these cases go to trial. So there's a ton of evidence here to go through, and it would appear to be a daunting case for any defense lawyer.
Yeah, and he was also asked, you know, also, Bradford, I'll go to you. He was asked why it took so long, right? Why it took so long to ultimately prosecute Sean Combs.
That was the best question.
What did you make of that?
I that was one of the best questions asked, to be quite honest with you. Most of the stuff, he just reiterated what was going on. But I think the best question was, how did it go on for so long? Why is it only now that the feds are paying attention to it? And quite often you'll see that, you know, we always say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. What happens is a lawsuit like this, like Cassie's is filed, and I said this at the time, when I read Cassie's lawsuit, I said this was the dumbest thing, that he didn't settle this lawsuit before they actually filed that lawsuit, was probably the dumbest legal move I've ever seen in all my years, because that opened the floodgates to not only civil cases, it was like blood in the water. At that point, the feds can't ignore it anymore. And believe me when I tell you, there has been whispers and street talk for years and years and years about different things revolving around Sean Combs, the arson cases, the violence, the things of that nature that have been, you know, low whispers. And if the feds really wanted to jump in on that, the feds could have done that a long time ago. The feds chose not to do that, I believe, because of the position of the individual that the whispers were being made of. So once it becomes public like this, they have no choice. You know, their backs are against the wall. They have no choice but to pursue exactly what is the allegations are being made. And that Cassie lawsuit was basically their roadmap.
Yeah, and that's a good point. One thing I wanted to follow up with about that, Bradford, is he was asked about why New York's handling this. Now, I read through the indictment. There are certain connections to New York that this enterprise was facilitated through the Southern District, but he also said, look, you know, I'm biased. I want to handle this case. Our office has the resources to handle it. We've covered complex cases before. This is what we do. Okay, but you have to have some. Why is it your office versus a Florida office versus a California office? What did you make of that? What were we supposed to take about why the Southern District is handling this?
My guess is because Sean Combs has been such a New York figure. He got the key to New York from the mayor, I think, last year. And he's been such a staple of New York that I think that's why they wanted to bring it in New York. Not to take anything away from New York. I've had many cases in the Southern District. I think that the prosecutors are some of the best in the country, but I'm biased because I think our prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida are some of the best in the country, and they've done multiple complex litigation in the Southern District of Florida. I mean, Noriega was tried, you know, all these different cases that have been brought in the Southern District of Florida have been very complex and very detailed. So my guess is there was probably a discussion of what area would take it and what area probably had a little bit of a jump on another area, and it was decided, I'm sure, between the districts that New York would handle the matter. But I would think that it would either go to the Southern District of Florida or Southern District of New York. I don't see a lot of other districts, not to throw any shade on other districts, But the Southern District of New York and the Southern District of Florida, I think, are two of the finest districts in the country when it comes to complex litigation and complex cases.
So, Chris, I want to go to you about something. You know, he mentioned, and we saw this also in the paperwork, there are a number of alleged victims who have cooperated in this case, a lot of alleged witnesses to this conduct as well. While many might see this as a win, as a day justice has come, he talked about Damian Williams, how it was a year ago, Sean Combs got the key to the city, and now he's indicted. This is not easy for them, right? This is the start of the process where they may have to be identified. They may have to testify publicly, at least in front of a jury. Talk to me about, in your experience, when this does now move through the legal process, for the victims of abuse to have to go through this.
Well, I think the victims will find this somewhat liberating, the fact that they can come into a courtroom, tell their story, knowing that, you know, Combs is being detained in all likelihood, knowing that the eyes of the federal government and federal law enforcement are on him and his people. They finally feel like it's safe to come forward and tell their story about being preyed on, about being exploited, because at the end of the day, that's what this is: sexual exploitation by a predator at a level which we very rarely see. I mean, you take a look at R. Kelly, right? Those cases were whispered about for a number of years. There were civil suits, but it wasn't until a documentary was put together and laid this all out there. Evidence that everybody knew about, but it was all in one digestible series. And that's when you saw the federal government get involved, and that's when you saw the indictment there. So the civil lawsuits here are the same thing, that put together a case for the Homeland Security agents to really get a grip on. And now, after these raids, after these witnesses now feel comfortable coming forward, it's a huge case.
Bradford, from a legal point of view, so I'm looking at the racketeering conspiracy, count one. It takes up, I don't know, I'm looking at the indictment. Takes up 11 pages, and that's just the indictment, right? So it doesn't even go to the specifics of it. Then you have count two, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and then you have count three, transportation to engage in prostitution. How complicated and tough is it for prosecutors to prove those charges?
You know, like I said before, RICO cases are usually, it's not that they're difficult, it's that it's so expansive, it's so vast that you have, you know, all these facts, all these things that are coming in to prove that racketeering charge. It's a long road. You know, this would be a long case, because I think you'd have anywhere from 60 to 80 witnesses that would be coming in, including law enforcement, victims, you know, assistants, records custodians, things of that nature. So it's not that it's super complicated. It's just that it is very, like I said, a very long road. It is easy to do when you tell a story and you go through the story time-wise. This is what happened on this date, and this is how it happened. The tedious part comes with phone records, digital stuff, you know, different kinds of evidence. The physical evidence is the easy stuff. The phone records of who called who and when this call was made and how it was made, that's when all these diagrams come in, and you have pie charts, things of that nature. That's the more difficult part. But is it a difficult case to prove? Not if they're saying what they have. It's just a tedious case to prove. It's one of those things that you have to go through, have a checklist of everything that you're expecting to prove, and you go through methodically and check those things off through each witnesses. I think you're going to have a government team of probably, my guess would be four government employees, but probably AUSAs, and then two federal agents at the table to assist.
Right. So listen, this is a very, very big development, not unsurprising considering if anybody's been following this case. Sean Combs has officially been indicted by a grand jury. We read the indictment. We now know what the government's position is regarding bail. We heard from the United States Attorney. We're going to continue this conversation. Chris Hansen, thank you so much